Samantha Winton, are you ready to discover your history? We've meticulously combed through hundreds of records, from newspaper articles, books, land deeds, and court records, tracking down your ancestors in the paper trail they've left behind. We've also used the latest advances in DNA technology to confirm that these are indeed the ancestors you descend from, people who have lived long ago that are still alive in you genetically. In all, we've been able to trace your family hundreds of years back to colonial America and the Enlightenment period of Europe, and found stories of the lives of your ancestors within the context of the historical time they've lived in. We focused on your father Alan's family, the Wintons and the Todds. We've uncovered stories of soldiers who have enlisted and fought during times of war, one of which was your grandfather, George Gilbert Winton. After graduating high school in Stamford, Connecticut, when the world was at war for the second time, your grandfather enlisted and served in the United States Navy as an aviation machinist, working on mechanical parts of airplane bombers. He was in the South Pacific in 1945 on the USS Sangamon when a Japanese pilot issued a suicide attack on the ship, which killed 11 crew members, 25 went missing, and 21 were wounded. George survived. When the United States was torn apart, embroiled in a bloody civil war over slavery, your second great-grandfather, Lorenzo Dow Todd, at 17 years old, joined the 20th North Carolina Infantry Regiment of the Confederate Army. He and his company fought in over a dozen clashes with the Union, including the Battle of Antietam, the most bloodiest one-day battle in American history, as well as the Battle of Gettysburg, the largest and deadliest battle in the Civil War. He was also there in Appomattox, Virginia, on the day when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in 1865, ending the Civil War. You also have American Revolutionary War veterans in your bloodline. Your fifth great-grandfather, James Hines, joined a militia in Pitt County, North Carolina, fighting for American independence. Other supporters for the American Patriots cause in your ancestry comes from a father and son duo who weren't even born in the American colonies. Your fifth and sixth great-grandfathers, John and Luke Mann, were born in Ireland and emigrated to the colony of Georgia. During the Revolution, both were part of an assembly of 45 men who gathered in 1775 in the Provisional Congress of Savannah to take action against the English Crown's punishment to Massachusetts as retaliation for the Boston Tea Party. In 1778, Georgia legislature passed an act where the estates of people who taken sides of the British were to be confiscated and given to supporters. Both John and Luke received property for their support. We've uncovered stories of politicians like your great-granduncle, Wankard Pooser. Wankard was self-educated, becoming a teacher and principal for over 20 years without a degree, a farmer and owner of a moving company who, after an unsuccessful campaign for state senator in 1935, later represented Jackson County in the Florida House of Representatives from 1945 to 1947. He made a campaign promise to reject every single bill that was presented to him, to which he kept true, only passing at most 2 bills, saying, "My constituents would be far better served if I concentrated on killing rather than passing bills." A colorful, outspoken man with a cantankerous attitude, his criticism and eccentric behavior were a frequent thorn in the sides of the governor, judges, lobbyists, and other House members. Your fourth great-grandfather, Lewis Hines, lived in Georgia. After getting into law, he served as a judicial officer for Bryan County as a court justice. His ambitions grew, and he represented Bryan County later on as a senator, and much later in life was a leader of the Committee for the Republican Party's Convention of the States' Rights. His brother Charlton also became a state senator, serving for 8 terms, representing the people of Liberty County. He even founded the town Hinesville. They weren't your only ancestors invested in the development of their hometown. Although he lost the race for Tampa's county commissioner in 1916, your great-grandfather, Butler Stiles Todd, was an entrepreneur who used his business in hauling to develop Tampa's roads as it was expanding to become a city in the early decades of the 20th century. One of the largest jobs he secured was the handling of the construction of Tampa City Hall in 1915. While we found many admirable things about your ancestors, we also have found some hard things you should know. For instance, we found your ancestors' role in slavery. We looked into your Hines family and found that on this line you descend from at least 5 generations of slave owners. Your 7th great-grandfather, William Hines' will, deeds each of his 7 sons land and slaves. His son David, your 6th great-grandfather, gave as presents to his son a horse, cow, and a hog. Listed among the presents were a 14-year-old named Joe and a 50-year-old named Paul. When your 5th great-grandfather, American Revolutionary War vet James Hines, was dying and wrote his last will and testament, he willed to his 5 sons a Negro fellow Jim that was to be equally divided among them after his death. When his son Lewis, the state senator, died, an appraisal of his estate revealed that he owned 119 slaves ranging in ages from infant to 80 years that he kept on 2 plantations that he owned in Georgia. When his estate was ready to be divided among his heirs, the slaves were placed in 11 lots according to their monetary value, not their family connections, and members of the Hines family drew their lot to receive their share of slaves from Lewis's estate. His son, your 3rd great-grandfather, Thomas Hines, received 4 slaves, making the total he owned 5. Delving into a family's history doesn't always guarantee that everything found will be positive. We end up finding the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we should have the courage to face it all, learn from it, and do better. Turning now to your grandfather, George Gilbert Winton, we found him to be your most recent first-generation American-born ancestor, born to parents whose lineages stretch far back in Scotland hundreds of years ago. His father, George Anderson Winton, was born in the port town of Leith in 1889, where he worked in warehouses. It was here where he met and married Annie Ritchie Renwick. Annie was born in the village of Kirknewton in 1890, the natural-born daughter of a 17-year-old domestic servant and an unknown father. She worked making labels in a biscuit factory, being one of many women in Scotland's workforce in the beginning of the 20th century. George and Annie had 3 sons, but after the birth of their 3rd son, Sinclair, they made the decision to leave Scotland, most likely due to the economic depression that had hit the country during World War I. In January 1921, the family boarded a ship called the SS Carmania and emigrated to the United States, where they settled in Chicago, and your grandfather George and his sister Christine were born. Sadly, Annie passed away in 1935 at 45 years old, and George Sr. made the decision to take the children to Florida, where he worked for the Florida Orange Wood Corporation in Tampa, the only of its kind in the world, making products out of orange wood seedlings, such as manicure sticks. He later became supervisor and helped the company contribute towards Tampa's post-war economic growth. George and Annie weren't the only ones who left Scotland for the United States. Annie's mother, Christina, and her second husband, David Coos, left in 1920, a year before George and Annie. Before they sailed on the SS Kaiser and August Victoria with $135 in their pockets, Christina owned a dairy shop in Leith, and David was a shale miner. The shale industry literally kept the Industrial Revolution running. Shale is found underground, and once extracted, it went through a heating process that created an oil that was used for the lubrication of machines. Christina's brothers James, George, and Adam were also miners, going underground, undercutting the bottom of the shale face, drilling holes into it, and with a series of explosions, extracted it. By the early 1900s, Many Scots were having a difficult time of securing industrial jobs to take care of their families, and many left for the United States. Christina and George's decision to move was because her sister Lilas and brother-in-law George Condy left for Spring Valley, Illinois in 1901. George and his brothers had gone back and forth between mining jobs, but permanently settled in Illinois, paving the way for Christina to come, and ultimately your great-grandparents George and Annie. Samantha, you descend from hard workers. Christina's father, James Renwick, was a master stonemason where he built the cottages for workers in Kirk Newton's Oil Bank Oil Works. After a brief try at entrepreneurship in the dairy field, he went back to working for the oil works and helped to build their factory. We were able to locate a picture of something he had built, a 3-home house he called Thistle Cottage, where he and his wife, Annie Ritchie, lived in for the rest of their days. Another interesting occupation of one of your ancestors was John Winton's work as a clay tobacco pipe maker, a trade he likely picked up as an apprentice to his father, who also made them. While looking into John's life, we uncovered that while he had Scottish parents, he actually was born in England. Our researchers found his baptismal record in Tweedsmith, England. There was another shocking discovery we uncovered about his father James. As we dug into Scotland's civil records, James's death certificate revealed that he was the illegitimate son of a woman named Agnes Winton. The record did not reveal who his father is. This means that the Winton name you have comes from James's mother, not his father. This was a huge mystery, and since this mystery ancestor was on his direct paternal line, we had your father Alan take a Y DNA test. The Y chromosome is a sex chromosome that is uniquely present in biological males, passed down from father to son without significant changes. Since it can be inherited unchanged, the test could offer a clue about the identity of James's father, who lived hundreds of years ago. We eagerly waited for the results. When they arrived, we found men who matched Alan on markers of his Y chromosome, giving us clues that pointed to the identity of your mystery ancestor. What the results pointed towards was that your 4th great-grandfather was an Irish man with the last name Devine, or a variation of it. Unfortunately, we could not identify him, but it is our hope as more people test and records become available, we can uncover this mystery. This was not the only shocking discovery we found. While looking into your great-grandmother Carly Pooser, we uncovered that she and her brother Wankard were adopted. What this meant, however, is that we couldn't use the paper trail to trace further back, since the couple who raised her weren't her biological parents. So this is where we turn to DNA. Combing through hundreds of matches in multiple DNA databases, we were able to identify clusters of matches who descend from 2 men, Trammell Elliott and James Rast, who were around Carly's age. The amount of DNA your father Alan shared with their descendants told us that they were Carly's brothers. We learned that they too had also been adopted, but lived with separate families. There was still the mystery of who were their parents. How we solved this mystery is nothing short of miraculous. We tracked down a descendant of James who had in their possession a transcribed letter written in 1924. This letter was written by his and Carly's mother, a woman named Mary Frances Hutto. In her letter, Mary gives the name of their father, Lorenzo Elliott, and that they married in Alabama in 1889. When Mary was pregnant with James, Lorenzo got into an altercation with someone that ultimately took his life, leaving Mary a widow of very small children with nothing. She goes on to say in her letter that when she gave birth to James, preachers in nearby Defuniak Springs, Florida, found households to care for all the children, including your great-grandmother Carly, promising that when she got well and could make a home for the children, she'd be able to get them back. Unfortunately, she became bedsick, and James too was placed in a home. 8 months later, when she recovered, she remarried to secure a home for her children. But when she went back to retrieve them, she found that the families her children were placed in had moved away, and she wasn't informed of their whereabouts. According to Mary's letter, Trammell, Carly, Wenkert, James were all taken away illegally since adoption papers were never signed. Decades later, Mary was able to eventually track down her children and tried to establish a relationship with each one. But sadly, not all were eager to reconnect. Carly was said to not want to have anything to do with Mary. We uncovered all this and more. There's so much more you can learn about in your digital photo album. There you can see some of the records and photographs shared about the ancestors we talked about in this video. Your report is where you can read a bit about the lives of your ancestors that we couldn't share in this video. And finally, you can visit your family tree online that shows all of the ancestors we've found, where you can see exactly how you descend from them. Thank you for entrusting us to guide you in uncovering your family's history. Our aim is for you to recognize that you're a part of a grand tapestry woven with the stories of all those who have come before you, their lives paving the way for your existence, and that you stand upon their shoulders. It is our hope this history is the beginning of you learning about your ancestors. May you grow with this knowledge, keeping to heart that you are carrying their legacy in your DNA. As you move forward, remember that they accompany you, and with all that they've bestowed upon you, may it empower you to forge a path that leaves the world better than when you entered it. I'm Andre Lamotte, and thank you for allowing me to help you discover your history.